When our finances are flourishing, then we can make our money work for us. We can really invest in all areas of our lives and not be hindered.
You're listening to Becoming Wildly Resilient, brought to you by University of Kentucky Human Resources, Health and Wellness. In this series, we'll explore a variety of well-being topics with experts from the university community in physical, emotional, nutritional, and financial health. Join us, and together we'll discover how we can thrive at work, home, and beyond. Welcome back to another episode of Becoming Wildly Resilient. I'm your host, Jakob Hester, and joining me today is Dr. Nichole Huff. Nichole is an assistant professor in the Department of Family Sciences, Consumer Economics, and Financial Counseling degree program, and an extension specialist for family finance and resource management with the UK Cooperative Extension Service. She earned a PhD in Family Sciences from the University of Kentucky and a master's degree in Marriage and Family Therapy from East Carolina University. And she's also a certified family life educator with the National Council on Family Relations. Today, we're talking about financial well-being, what it is, how you can improve or maintain healthy financial habits, and how it ties into our overall well-being. Thank you for joining me, Nichole.
Thank you for having me, Jacob. Happy to be here.
So tell the listeners a little more about yourself as a person, as well as the work that you do.
Sure. Well, as a person, I am a wife and a mom of three. So I have three little ones at home and have been navigating pandemic life like the rest of the parents out there. And, as a professional, I joined the University of Kentucky faculty in July. So we moved here mid-pandemic, and it has been a whirlwind for sure, but I'm excited to be back in Kentucky and excited to be a part of the university.
So what's one way you've been taking care of yourself during the pandemic, especially after what is probably a stressful move?
Yeah, well, I think just looking to the bright side, so trying to make the most of it. And that's what I tell my kids all the time, that, we can get through anything for a little while. And so we have just been trying to have fun when we can. So lots of family game nights, movie nights, exploring outdoors when the weather is nice, and just, taking advantage of the slow pace, because I know it will get back to the rat race sooner rather than later. And so we've been trying to just take it in stride, knowing that it'll only be here a short season.
Yeah, it's kind of like that growth mindset where you take the opportunities out of some of the challenges that you may be facing as well. So finding, like you said, taking the bright side for things like that when some things are not in your control.
Absolutely.
So before we dive into our topic, can you talk a little bit about the impact that cooperative extension has on communities across Kentucky?
Sure. So with Kentucky Cooperative Extension, I serve as an extension specialist for family finance and resource management. And that is just one small focus area for Cooperative Extension. And so Cooperative Extension has a trifold mission: education, research, and outreach. And what I love most about Cooperative Extension is that we are in all 120 counties in Kentucky. And so we are able to provide both direct and personalized resources to county residents. And so we have state specialists like myself, but we also have county agents who are on the ground to just help Kentucky families across the state. And specifically, though, with Family and Consumer Sciences Extension, we really try to educate and equip and build strong families in, family finance is one area for sure, but also health and nutrition, housing, child and youth development, parenting, aging. The list is very comprehensive.
Yeah, it's a ton. That's why I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of talk about the broad scope that Cooperative Extension has across the university, and employees in all 120 counties is really impressive to me. Every time I hear that stat, it's like, wow, it's so crazy to think about the university having such a broad reach on the entire state like that. And so it's cool in one way. And then it probably brings its challenges as well, as far as like building a community within the university. To have somebody in far Western Kentucky, or say like Harlan County or somewhere like that, can be really difficult. But it also shows the impact that we can have within our broader community within the state. And that's always really powerful to me. And I know Cooperative Extension does a lot of great work all over the state.
It really does. And, our footprint is expansive, and that has been a unique benefit of this pandemic, is that because we have been forced to change the way we deliver programming, we have been able to reach counties that, I wouldn't have, for example, in my first 6 months here if I were just traveling across the state. But that has been one of those positive things that have come from the pandemic, is allowing us to reach counties and to network in different and new ways. And so I agree, big footprint challenges, but also great opportunities to connect and really personalize education throughout Kentucky.
Yeah, and on a personal note from health and wellness, that's an opportunity that came for us too with the pandemic, was to be able to reach more of our employees in those 120 counties, not just the single one that we're located in, or maybe the surrounding few counties around Fayette County. So that's been exciting and something that we've tried to really grow from over the last year.
Yes, absolutely.
So April is Financial Literacy Month, and it's also sort of the wind up to tax season. So I figured it'd be a great time to bring in financial well-being into the conversation. So let's start by generally defining both financial literacy and financial well-being. So how would you define those two terms?
Yes, so their financial literacy is easier to talk about than taxes, that's for sure. Well, financial literacy is at its heart having the foundational knowledge, skills, and habits that promote lifelong financial health. And so it is not a one and done. And that's really what financial health and well-being is. It's that practice of strong and sustainable financial principles, things like spending wisely and developing a budget and avoiding debt and saving for the future. But those habits and principles that contribute to financial health.
Those habits that you mentioned there, we'll dive into those a little bit in the conversation as well. So what does it mean to be financially healthy then? Because you've kind of talked about sort of what these two terms are, but where do we define financially healthy? Like, how do I pick that out for myself?
Right. Well, there is no one-size-fits-all definition for being financially healthy. But to apply it to yourself personally, think of it as being physically healthy. It requires discipline. So, oftentimes if we think of being fit and healthy, it just doesn't come naturally, especially as you age. You have to work at it. You have to choose fruits and vegetables over junk food. You have to choose water over soda. You have to commit to sleeping well and exercising regularly. And the same principles of discipline hold true with our finances. To be financially healthy, you have to commit to implementing those financial practices that will produce long-term positive results.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of where I was leading with my next question, would be to connect financial well-being to the other sections, because we often find that financial well-being is one of the dimensions of well-being that are left off maybe, or that was kind of a late add, just depending upon the model that you look at, or maybe the place that you work. They may or may not recognize financial well-being as one of those dimensions of well-being. Here in HR, we do. So that's why I want to talk about it. And I also want to tie that into that bigger conversation on our well-being. So how do you see financial well-being connecting to the other dimensions? You already kind of touched on that a little bit with examples of like physical health and aging.
Yeah, absolutely. Just when, like I was mentioning, how comprehensive Family and Consumer Sciences Extension is, the same is true with our health. And I know that, being in wellness, you would agree with this, that, we are at our most healthy when the different parts of our life are performing optimally. And, I see financial being very much so connected to our overall well-being. As you mentioned, I have a background as a family therapist. And so I see my role as a financial educator I see a lot of my research and outreach efforts, situated at that intersection of mental and financial health. Because research would most definitely support that there is a reciprocal interaction and affect between our financial health and our mental health. Because when our mental health struggles, our financial health struggles, and vice versa. And so I think to overlook such an intimate and integral part of our livelihood would be to leave a dimension off of our overall well-being. And so, you really have to consider the whole person and what makes up their livelihood so that you can focus on whole health.
We often talk about emotion or talking about our mental and emotional health on the podcast, obviously related to resilience. So I kind of was trying to think about a couple of examples of how I would think about connecting financial well-being to that broader picture. And I kind of actually came up with a couple of examples myself, one being kind of a good example of that and one being sort of more of a negative example. So the good one was the ability to express compassion through things like financial donation and being able to feel connected to your community. So if you're able to give back like that, that ability to express that compassion does you some good, and it does good for someone else as well. So it's good for sort of that social and emotional well-being for you. The other one that I had, which was sort of the negative idea, was thinking about marriage and money, because I know that is, and you could probably expand on this a little bit, but the idea of like the argument over money and people having like financial counseling before you get married and those types of things. And I think I read that like one of the number one predictors for whether a marriage will last is if you're having money arguments early in your marriage or like right before it, can be a strong indicator of a future divorce. And I saw it's like roughly half of couples argue over money, and then about a third of divorces were due to financial disagreements. So right. Maybe talk about that a little bit since you have a background in both.
Yeah, absolutely. So communication over money is one of the top two things that couples fight about, and but money is again, it goes back to being at the heart of our livelihood. And when couples will invest a lot of money in a wedding, for example, maybe pre-pandemic. The pandemic kind of shifted that. But then don't invest into, having those same shared goals and visions and about planning that future financially. And so it can lead to sometimes mismanagement of money. So if people have different attitudes or habits, spending habits, then you may have one saver and one spender, or somebody that blows through finances, or especially in terms of joint checking accounts, and then understanding the complexities that come with spending and relationships and saving and developing shared goals and shared family visions. And so when couples or individuals, when any family is faced with financial stress, managing financial issues, it takes a lot of mental effort, and that effort takes up a significant portion of our mental capacity. And, our brains need space to tackle a task. And so when we are stressed about our finances, it can freeze some of the other areas of our minds that would be focused towards relationship preservation or towards overall health and well-being. And it can really consume us because, again, livelihood is connected to our money. And money is one of those things you have to have. You have to have it to survive and to thrive. And so when we're financially stressed, it really limits our ability to think about other things. And so research shows that when our mental health is low, we tend to spend more. And that's because that discipline that I mentioned, that kind of goes out the window. And, a quick spending trip or an impulse buy, it can release endorphins that are very short-lived. And we can spend to feel better. And so I do not recommend retail therapy, not at all. But poor mental health can lead to the inability to make money decisions, and it can increase the likelihood that people will put off managing financial task. And you know how it is. Things can quickly snowball or avalanche. And so one little problem can turn into a very big problem when we don't manage it. And that's why financial literacy and having those skills and those communication skills, if you're in a relationship, is very important to that overall long-term financial health.
Yeah, I think something interesting that you talked about is basically the two-way street between something like financial well-being and relationships or mental well-being or anything like that, where they affect each other each direction. So you could maybe be in a hard financial situation that is causing stress, which is obviously negatively affecting your physical health at that point. Or it could be the other way around, where you're stressed about something else and you're trying to maybe fill this void or to feel better, like you mentioned, and go on an impulse spending binge. And that puts you into a financial situation that you may not want to be in, or you may not have the means for. And maybe you end up in credit card debt or something like that, which is sort of snowballs from there. So the idea that these are connected, it's kind of surprising to me that financial well-being is not often, or is less often, I guess I should say, connected with the rest of them, because it really is a two-way street for them.
It is. And I think that even conversations like this, it begins to bring about awareness. And I think, again, talking about growth mindset from the pandemic, because we have talked so much about how families were impacted financially during the pandemic, I think that it has brought to the forefront this idea that it is that that when we have financial stress, it affects all areas of our life, and then, like you said, not just debt and incurring debt, but if you are stressed to the point in your life that you can't perform your job, you might be at risk of losing your job, which would contribute again to financial implications. And so there's a lot of reciprocity there, that it's important that we can equip ourselves with the tools that we need to be strong and to stand up in terms of stress management in our finances.
Yeah, obviously this show is all about resilience and how we grow from the challenges we face. So we've kind of talked about them in two different ways to this point, with problems that you may have caused yourself potentially from maybe decision-making or habits that you've had, or maybe a lack of knowledge or a lack of skill or something like that. And then there's this other side, which are the things that are out of your control. And a lot of times that's where resilience kicks into play, because we're going to face these things within our lives. And you mentioned the pandemic, and I think that's a prime example of a financial challenge that hit a lot of people that many people weren't expecting. It's not something we ever would have guessed would have really happened to us. It really only happens, every 100 years or so. And so that really challenged a lot of people, especially when people were getting laid off or furloughed or those types of things. So how can financial literacy help us become more resilient, particularly when we're facing those unexpected challenges, say like the pandemic or something else?
Yeah, so if it's one thing that 2020 did teach us and the pandemic taught us, it is to expect the unexpected. And I do love what you said there, that sometimes the situations and the financial situations that we find ourselves in, sometimes it's at our doing. If it's debt or credit card debt or mismanaging our finances, or even if we lose a job at our expense. But then, like the pandemic, sometimes what happens to us is out of our control. And that's why, developing strong financial literacy, a skill set, is so important to develop financial resilience. So whatever, where that locus of control lies, what really matters with resiliency is what you do moving forward. And so whether it was in your control or out of your control, what do you do moving forward? And so in terms of financial resiliency, to bounce back from those challenging financial situations, we really need to better understand how to manage our finances and resources. So we have to equip ourselves with those tools and those habits and those disciplines and that skill set, because finances can be confusing. So when you're talking about interest rates and stocks and all kinds of financial terms, it can make someone feel overwhelmed, and it's easy to just tune it out. And so, to begin developing financial resiliency, it is important to bring things into our control and realize that, hey, we can learn more about these things. It doesn't have to be confusing. We can start small, we can start somewhere, and we can begin to build our financial toolkit in a way that when those unexpected things come, we're better equipped to handle them. And then we can also, the more knowledgeable, the more financially disciplined we become, the more likely we are to just avoid those pitfalls to begin with.
Yeah, there was two things you mentioned in there too that I think were key points to connecting it to the bigger picture as well, which is the first one being learning from the past, essentially, in that the pandemic is something that we would not have expected. But now that we've been through it, we sort of know what has happened. There were plenty of opportunities for us to learn from that as well, so that moving forward, we can focus on preparing for more things that are unexpected, or that may come at a very inopportune time, and the things that you don't ever think would happen. So it's not to go like doomsday prepper on your finances necessarily, but that I think that is resilience. When you are faced with a challenge and maybe you made a bad decision, learning from that mistake though is where that resilience really comes. Whether you got through it unscathed, or whether you learned something from the mistakes you made, either one of those are going to build on your resilience if you take the time to kind of reflect on those things.
Absolutely. And with regard to 2020, it has set itself up so well for puns and memes and things about hindsight being 2020 and learning from those mistakes. And, I have used it as a teaching tool myself. So with regard to the financial challenges that the pandemic has placed, if you were a family that was negatively affected in terms of finances or resources, what can you learn from that so that you're better prepared next time? So maybe it's building an emergency fund, or maybe it's paying down debt so that you don't have so much money coming out compared to what you have coming in. Maybe it's better using your resources, or simple, because we talk a lot about finances, but family resources is important too. And so maybe it's better managing the resources that you have, and how can you stretch those and simplify your life in a way that you can make do with what you have. And so there are lots of learning opportunities in terms of building resiliency by looking towards the past. What lesson can you learn from it? How can you move on? How can you do things differently moving forward? Absolutely.
Yeah, I think another key learning that I've found is sort of where you spend your money, what you value. And I think 2020 was a really good example of that for my wife and I, and what we want to do with our money, and some like spending leaks or things that we would have done when we could go do anything. And we got stuck at home. We started to realize we enjoyed other things more. And so we could shift those finances around, or we have more money that we weren't spending on more frivolous things that we can devote to maybe house renovations or things like that, where we spend a lot of our time, pre-pandemic or not. So I think that's a good lesson that I've taken personally out of this as well. The other thing that you mentioned that I thought was interesting as well is starting small. So we've talked about this. I talk about this in physical activity, particularly when I've done exercise consults in the past. And it's always a really difficult concept for people, especially when you're getting started with something new, because you kind of have that fresh energy and you really want to go all in on it. But sometimes you bite off a little more than you can chew, if I can tie in a nutrition reference there as well. But the starting small is really important in building those longer term habits as well. And I think that applies really well to your financial habits.
It does. And I think that we can get lost in the big picture to the point that we don't move forward at all. And so, if it is, you mentioned spending leaks, which is one of my favorite terms ever, because it is oftentimes small drains on our account that, if we're not careful over time, can add up and then, deplete our budgets. And so, it's looking for ways to make small changes. Maybe it's brewing coffee at home versus driving through somewhere and paying $5 or $6 a cup, because that $5 or $6 turns into $15 or $18 a week, which turns into $700 or $800 for the year. And so the choices that we make can add up quickly. And so you may not be ready to, double your investment for retirement, but you could probably cut back on a coffee. And so I think that the smaller practices we can put into place, we can begin to capture that momentum so that you can save a little more or pay down a little bit of debt. That's why the debt snowball method is such a popular one in financial management practices, because when we see small momentum, it makes us want to do more, and it realizes more is in our control. And so sometimes just setting those small goals will help us develop stronger practices over time financially.
To this point, we've been talking about the pandemic, which was something kind of really on one extreme of things. What are some other financial traps or setbacks that people more commonly face throughout their lives?
Yeah, well, I think, and I'm trying not to tie it back to the pandemic, but not having an emergency fund, I think, is one of the bigger things. And so, again, a pandemic is not something we're going to face, hopefully not again in our lifetime. But you might have your car break down or an unexpected medical or household related bill. You may lose your job or anything can happen. A child may need braces, which again, I joke that that's a expected, unexpected expense because it's easy to put off until that bill comes and that orthodontist visit comes. But it is preparing for the financial situations that can be large and overwhelming. And so I think one of the biggest the most common financial trap or setback that I see is really the inability to save. Now, another is incurring debt. And so, relying on spending money that you don't have. And that's essentially what credit is spending money that you don't have readily available. And it can quickly add up. And so when the unexpected financial situation hits, then rather than focusing your financial energy on that, you've also got these bills. You've got debt bills to pay. And so those are two of the bigger ones. And those are two areas of financial literacy that I often encourage people to start with. Budgeting, which we can talk about more in depth, but also saving and debt management.
Yeah, that's actually where I want to go next, is to talk about the strategies, because we've now identified some common setbacks or common challenges that we may face. So how do we actually prepare for those, or what do we do when we actually have those happen to us? So what are some of the foundational habits or skills that you think people can use to improve their financial health and resilience?
Yes. So when developing or improving financial literacy, like I mentioned, I always suggest starting by assessing your current financial situation. And so begin with your monthly budget. And there are a couple of ways to do this. I suggest printing out a blank calendar and writing down what bills do I have that are due and when are they due, and kind of getting that overall monthly look at what do I have that is due when, and then keep track of what's due as well. That might be a quarterly payment or an annual payment, or that may not come around monthly or weekly. And then look at your income compared to your expenses, because ideally you really want to know where every penny of your money is going. And because most adults have uttered that phrase, where does my money go? It feels like it disappears. And so the first thing in developing that skill set, that financial skill set, is getting control of your monthly budget. And, compare your sources of income to your expenses and begin to track those, because we want our income to exceed our expenses. And that's when it creates opportunities to save or invest or pay down debt or to splurge, because we want to do fun things like home renovations or take vacations. We really want to take vacations after this year. And so we can do that when our expenses are minimized. because the flip side of that, when our expenses exceed our income, we generate debt. And that's what we want to avoid. And so that's when we have to look for ways to cut spending where we can, with those spending leaks, those small purchases that can add up quickly and drain your budget. And then look for other ways to maximize your resources and pay off outstanding debts. And then building that emergency fund if you haven't already. So those are the 3 steps that I recommend. Assess your current financial situation, figure out where your money is going, adjust accordingly, pay down debt, and begin to save.
Are there any practices, say you get your paycheck in, are there any things that you can do sort of as soon as that check comes in? What are some things that you can do at that moment to facilitate this as well?
Yeah, I think with monthly pay, it requires the most discipline for sure, because you're getting paid once a month. And so if that is the case for you, I would suggest starting with that calendar, that blank calendar, figuring out what your set dates are in terms of when bills are due, and then figure out which ones you can work with companies to adjust so that you get your bigger bills coming out of your account right after payday. And so then you know what you're left with to divide between those other expenses. Between groceries is a flexible expense. You have to eat, but you can control, to some extent, the cost of the food that you purchase or the amount of times you go out to eat or some of that spending or flex money. So I always suggest, especially with monthly, but anytime, that you take control over your due dates and that you and many companies will work with you. Lenders will often work with you to set due dates that work for your pay schedule. Most of the time, people just don't ask.
The transition from being paid biweekly to being paid monthly was something that I had to learn. That was a skill I had to learn. And moving all of my automatic bills to the first of the month or the second or third of the month so that it came out at the beginning was really helpful for me. And something else I found that really worked for me as well was to pay myself first. Mm-hmm. So I set up some automatic deposits into an extra account as well, one that I'm not easily going to move money. So that becomes part of my savings fund on top of the sort of normal standard deduction for retirement or something like that. I have my safety net essentially. I'm sending that money. I have I know roughly how much each month that I'm going to have extra or that I want to devote to that. And I move that money over immediately as well. So that's out of the way. My bills are then out of the way. And then I know, hey, I have this amount of money left. Now it's kind of like my fund. If there's something I want to do, I want to go get a massage, I want to go on a vacation, I want to do some house renovations or something small house renovations, probably not anything major, but things like that though, where or even thinking about the other dimensions of well-being. Say I want to maybe purchase a piece of equipment, or I want to hire a personal trainer or something like that, where there would be things that would also be investments in the other parts of my well-being. I have more of an opportunity to do that, or at least I can see where the opportunity lies, and then I can decide from there what's going to be most beneficial for me.
Yeah, that's a great tip. To pay yourself first is such a smart financial practice, because again, if that money sits in our account, we'll spend it on something. And so the more you can automate and that you can set money aside, the better. And I do like what you said about it's important to our financial well-being and our mental well-being, to have some fun money, because we need to take vacations. We need to have family time. We need to maybe focus on our health and focus on our wellness and do things that we want to spend our money on. And if all of our money is going into, say, bill payment or debt management, or if you're in over your head in terms of a car payment or a house payment, really kind of look and prioritize your life and say, do I want to be house poor, for example? That's a phrase that we often hear. Do I want to be in debt to my mortgage payment? Or maybe I want to invest in adventure instead and spend, rather than having a high mortgage payment, maybe I want to downsize a little bit so that I can free up some of my funds to do things that really kind of enrich my life and make me happy. If it fits within your budget, you have so much freedom to do those things that really contribute to our overall health and happiness when we're not burdened by debt, for example.
Are there any age-specific skills that work best at a certain time in your life?
Well, I think that we're never too old or too young to start investing in our financial knowledge. And so I think with small children, so if you're a parent, help your child develop financial literacy skills early. And so that might be just as simple as reviewing math concepts and learning numbers or place value or basic arithmetic skills. So when you go to the store, let them pay, help them count back change, learn the value of money or responsibility, let them earn money and then decide how to spend and save it. And so you can kind of help guide, children as they age if you're a parent. But if you're an adult, really think about the financial stage that you're about to enter into before you enter into it. For example, retirement's an easy one. If you want to retire, you can't wait until your retirement age to begin planning for it. It takes advanced planning. The same thing is true with college education. If you want to save for, say, a child's college education, you need to start doing that before they enter college. If not, you're going to be faced with student loans, or they will. And so, whether it is home ownership or buying a car or taking a vacation, but look at what is your financial goal? What is that goal? What are you working towards? And what steps do you need to take to get there? And so I would say plan in advance. And that's one of the best things you can do in terms of age-specific goals is don't let a life stage sneak up on you. Take some time to plan and be intentional so that you can enjoy each life stage as it comes.
Yeah, I think that sort of wisdom that comes along with aging is helpful as well. When you retirement is getting closer, you start to think about that a little bit more. So I think about those who are maybe now entering the workforce or have only been in it maybe a few years. What advice would you have for them that have, say, 20 plus years still before retirement? So it feels like very far away, so that it's not something that they're going to maybe want to focus on right now because it's not even remotely immediate to them.
It's so easy, especially when other things vie for your money, when you would rather have that money in your account than be putting it down till retirement, because it does seem so far away. But my biggest advice is don't wait. Begin investing, invest small. If you are working somewhere like the university who does an employee match, or as much as your finances allow, contribute what will be matched. Do what you can, and then don't touch that money. Don't touch that money. Don't do early withdrawals if you can help it. And really don't put off, because we have just completed a retirement book club through Cooperative Extension in the month of February. And time again, I would hear from older adults that they are at retirement age and they were surprised at how fast it came, and they're not financially prepared, and they're ready to move on to that next step and aren't financially prepared. And so time passes by quickly. And so as much as you're able and as early as you're able, invest in your future.
So what kind of questions would you ask the listeners to get them thinking about their financial situation or financial literacy, or kind of their overall financial well-being? What sort of prompts would you give them to start thinking about their personal situation and the steps that they could take?
I think I would ask listeners to, first of all, ask yourself, do you know where your money is going each month? I would ask listeners to make a list of their spending leaks and where is money kind of dripping out of your bank account, those intentional purchases. Would you rather have $700 at the end of the year or 3 coffees a week from a specialty coffee shop? And to begin kind of prioritizing your spending habits. I would challenge listeners to track their spending habits for at least a month, those little purchases, and especially as life normalizes a little more and you're out and about, are you getting lunch to go? Are you picking out takeout? How often? Are you putting things in your grocery cart that aren't planned? Really honing in on those spending leaks, because I think that people are often surprised by them. I would also ask listeners Where are you on your journey to retirement? If you were to continue saving what you're saving today, where would you be in 20 years, in 40 years, in 5 years? And so if you're not saving anything, you're not going to be very far. And so to really begin to assess your current situation and to ask yourself, okay, where do I want to go? And then to pick something fun, and I'll kind of end on that. Pick something fun to save for. So maybe it's a vacation when travel opens back up. Maybe it is a piece of exercise equipment that you've been wanting. But set one kind of financial goal to save towards. And so that way, when you're tempted to make one of those splurge or impulse or leak purchases, that you say, instead, I'm going to invest it in this bigger goal. And I think when we have something that we're working towards that is fun, that is a reward, it's much easier to exercise financial discipline on the small things.
Yeah, and I think the waiting for that purchase as well gives you enough time to decide if that is truly an impulse purchase or not. You may get a couple months into saving for something like that and realize, oh, I really don't want this rowing machine, or will I actually ever use it? Or should I purchase this Peloton? I don't know. It seems to work for everyone else, but if I have time to think about it, I may decide, oh, I don't actually want this. This is probably a better fit for me or something like that. So I think it gives you a little bit of time to think as well when you practice something like that.
Right. And when we delay gratification on purchases, it gives us time to research, to look for good deals, to see, what has better quality, to know what we're investing in, or if it's travel, to price compare and really shop around. And so when we plan our purchases, we often get better quality experiences and items too.
So to take this back out into sort of the bigger picture again, what are some of the financial literacy lessons that we could apply to other dimensions of our well-being?
Yeah, absolutely. We have talked about discipline before, and research really supports that when we're disciplined in our health, for example, we're disciplined in our finances and vice versa. And so I think that reining in our spending habits, if we haven't already, can just help us grow our discipline in other areas of our life. We've already talked about how when we're not stressed financially, it can lessen some of the burdens. That's one less thing we have to be stressed about in terms of another aspect of our overall well-being. And so learn and grow and figure out how to increase your knowledge and increase your discipline. Where do you need to cut back on in one area so that you can excel in another? And those are especially true in our finances, because finances are finite. Each individual and each family, you only have a certain amount of money. And so when that's gone, families can really struggle, and it does affect your livelihood. It's a word I've used a lot, but it's important. But on the flip side, when our finances are flourishing, then we can make our money work for us. We can really invest in all areas of our lives and not be hindered by that lack. And that's why I see financial literacy as a toolkit. It helps us build and rebuild. And when we have the tools in our toolkit that will help set us up on a trajectory for success, then when we get knocked down, we can rebuild more quickly, or we can just build great things from the beginning if we invest in our financial knowledge. So listening to a podcast on money, that's one way to start. But, really investing in growing your financial literacy skills. But I think you'll see then trickle effects in other areas of your life.
Yeah, you've used the term investment a few times in that answer, and that's how I think about it. That's how I think about something like self-care, which is brought up pretty commonly on this show. The time that you need for yourself, whether that's 5 minutes, whether that's 10 minutes, those little chunks of time, especially when we feel too overwhelmed, those are an investment. So that 5 or 10 minutes is going to buy you some more time. And the more that you continue to do practices like that, you're going to accumulate wealth. And in this case, that's a little bit of that resilience, or it's that buffer that you're giving yourself so that when a stressor does arise, maybe it doesn't feel like it's hitting you as hard as it otherwise would have. So I talk about that pretty commonly in financial terms for people, because we know we need self-care is not just about yourself. It's about others as well.
Absolutely.
So for those interested in learning more, what are some of the books, podcasts, websites, or other self-guided resources on this topic that you'd recommend that may add more value to listeners' lives?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the retirement book club that we just finished. And so that's by an author called Dr. Barbara O'Neill. She is a distinguished professor emeritus from Rutgers University. She has spent her career 40 plus years in personal finance. And so she authored a book. It's called Flipping a Switch, Your Guide to Happiness and Financial Security in Later Life. And what I love about that book is it looks at retirement planning in terms of financial transitions, social transitions, and lifestyle transitions. So it's more of that comprehensive look. It's not just looking at it from a financial or investment side that is heavily covered, but also what are some other things that you need to consider as you plan. And so whether you want to retire now or down the road, that's a book I recommend. She also does, she has a website called Money Talk. And I will leave the link for that in the show notes. But she does podcasts and blogs, and is just another money pun, but she is a wealth of information on personal finances. And again, she has an extension background. And so with that, I trust the integrity of her work, and that means a lot. Something else I would recommend is the Kentucky Saves Initiative. That's an external partner. It's part of the America Saves campaign, and you can link to that. Again, I'll leave that link with you, Jacob, in the show notes. But it is information on debt management and on investing and saving and how to really begin to be a saver. You can take Kentucky Saves Pledge, and it's just whatever your goal is, large or small, but it's an accountability system. It is a free tool that we partner with, and that's at Kentucky Saves. And then this is a resource that is also, I'm not sure if you have plugged it before, but for UK employees listening, the Enrich Financial Wellness and Management Program, and that's available at uk.enrich.org. That is a free resource for employees that if you're not familiar with, I would highly suggest it, because it has courses to learn more about financial literacy. It is free. It has budget management tools, saving tools, all types of just different tools. If you want to learn more about the house buying process or mortgages, or you need some of those terms decoded for you, it's just a really good repository of information and tools. And again, it's free. It's through university, because that's one thing that UK cares about, the financial health of its employees. And I can say that because I see it invest in financial practices. And so that's an internal resource, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you brought Enrich up, because that comes through HR. So
yes.
Yeah, another key point to bring out of that. One of the new features of Enrich also includes access to financial experts. So you can talk to them on the phone or video chat, that type of thing. And so you can request consults with them, or you can just call the number directly during their open hours, and they'll get you matched up with someone, on top of all the online module-based learnings that they have. But I think another cool feature of that is it gives you a money personality. So you take essentially like a quiz
Yes.
about your spending habits and those types of things in your financial situation, and it gives you a money personality. And that really gives you a good look at how you're spending and what your financial situation is.
Yeah, I think it's a great tool. And that's something we often do with an extension is we help people assess their, we call it money habitudes, but their habits and attitudes towards money, so that they become more aware of their spending habits. And so I love that Enrich does as well. And again, it's a good free tool that's at your fingertips. Take advantage of it. Take advantage of it as you're building your financial toolkit and you're strengthening your literacy skills.
So you mentioned the book club and you mentioned the habitudes there. What are some other programs or resources offered through Family and Consumer Science Extension that you all have?
Yeah, well, to learn about programs like that, I would really suggest following our MoneyWise initiative. And so you can find us on facebook.com/MoneyWise. We also have a website that I can link listeners to, but we put out We put out monthly newsletters, and so these are put out across the state. So they go to all 120 counties. They are free, and then we put everything gets fed through our Facebook page too, and that's where we will oftentimes showcase programs that we're doing. We just did a book club, and we did it with Dr. O'Neill. She joined us for 3 weeks for a book club on that retirement planning. We're currently in the middle of an estate planning webinar series where we have resources that the University of Kentucky has put out, and we're also linking extension resources, but we're linking with industry professionals as well. So you'll learn about that through our MoneyWise initiative. And that's a financial wellness initiative that I lead, and I have a team who puts out resources. And so I would suggest following us there. And then this April and May, and if you're listening after the fact, this stuff is archived and recorded, so you can still take advantage of these resources. But we're about to begin a series called Living with Loss, Playing the Hand You Are Dealt. And so we're going to be taking a look through, and this is all of Family and Consumer Sciences Extension, so all of those different areas that I mentioned earlier. But we're going to be looking more at resiliency. And so if you are listening to this, you probably have an interest in resiliency. And so I would encourage you to follow Family and Consumer Sciences Extension and to take part in that. It's a 6-week series. We'll have webinars, print material, podcasts that'll come out through FCS Extension. And 1 week we'll be talking about financial resiliency. And so I'll go into more in depth about that and just other elements of grief and coping. And so that's just one example of the programming we do. And so if you're not connected with Cooperative Extension, I would encourage you follow MoneyWise, follow FCS Extension, and just take advantage of the free resources and learning opportunities that we provide, just focused on all areas of health and well-being, including financial literacy.
Yeah, that 6-week program sounds like a really good opportunity to dive deeper onto this topic, because we can only talk about so much in roughly an hour. Right. So that's a great chance to spread that out over 6 weeks and really see the big picture again. So I highly recommend people checking that out. And I'll plug the Family and Consumer Science podcast, Talking Facts, as well. I'll stick that link in the show notes because I know you talk about this topic on there every once in a while too.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So one fun question for you. My last guest and I created a resilience playlist on Spotify that I'll share again in the show notes. So I want to keep that playlist going. So what are 1 or 2 songs that you can relate to or that you use for your own resilience?
This is such a fun question, Jacob. Currently on repeat for me is Looking Up by Bare Naked Ladies. And that is just a favorite college band of mine. So that is going to date me a little bit. But it is, when I say it is on repeat, it is really on repeat while I work. It just has a fun beat. And I love the overall message of the song. My favorite line in the song, it says, you go and worry about things you can't control. I'm going to see the donut. You can see the hole. And I love that because, we can focus on the hole in the donut or we can focus on the donut. And so the song is just a fun, upbeat reminder for me to focus on the positive things in the situation and, not to see those holes. So I'm going to choose to look up.
That's perfect. I'll add that to the playlist. And we've gotten some suggestions as well from some of our listeners. So if you want to contribute to that playlist, feel free to reach out to us at healthandwellness@uky.edu. And maybe I'll add your song on there as well. So finally, wrapping it all up, what's your take-home message from this conversation? Kind of boil down into maybe 1 or 2 sentences.
So I just wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this topic. And, I think that finances is like most everything in life. It is about the perspective that we take. When we are intentional with our finances, we can be mindful of our spending habits and our practices, and we can take a little bit of control over our future. So I would just like to say, I would encourage you to seek opportunities to grow and to expand your knowledge of finances, and to know that financial literacy and financial health, they aren't end destinations. So it's more of lifelong practices that strengthen with effort and time and intentionality, which is my word for 2021. So it pays to invest in your financial future.
That's perfect. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing some of your knowledge with me on financial well-being.
Thank you so much for having me.
That'll do it for another episode of Becoming Wildly Resilient. After listening to this episode, I hope you were able to identify some skills or tools you can use to improve your financial literacy, and that you also learned how your financial habits can impact your overall well-being. As always, you can find links in the show notes to anything we mentioned throughout the show. Normally, this is also where I would preview some upcoming programming from HR Health and Wellness and some of our well-being partners, but I'm going to keep it short for now. Shortly after this episode drops, I'll be releasing a special preview episode for our upcoming Employee Wellbeing Week happening May 3rd through May 7th. So if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to Becoming Wildly Resilient wherever you consume your podcast so that you don't miss the special preview episode or any future episodes. Until next time, take care of yourself and others and stay well. Thanks for listening to Becoming Wildly Resilient, a podcast series from University of Kentucky Human Resources, Health and Wellness. The UK HR Health and Wellness team, consisting of certified health coaches, fitness experts, registered dietitians, and wellness specialists, offer a wide range of online and in-person programming to University of Kentucky employees, retirees, and their spouses. If you enjoyed this episode, you can listen and subscribe to future episodes wherever you find your podcasts. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by searching @UKY Wellness. There, you'll find links to episode show notes and more. You can also email healthandwellness@uky.edu with any questions or suggestions for future episode topics. To learn more about well-being benefits offered by University of Kentucky Human Resources, visit www.uky.edu/HR/wellbeing. Live well.